The years when I pursued the inner images were the most important of my life. Everything else is merely the elaboration of what burst forth from the unconscious. Throughout Jujutsu Kaisen, domain expansions are framed as acts of domination, forcing an opponent into one's inner world in order to overpower and dominate them. Yuji Itadori's domain, however, breaks from what has already been established by focusing on an internal conversation and observation of childhood memories. This moment offers some of the most life-changing advice in the series. So in this video, I'll go over the philosophical and psychological concepts behind Yuji's domain expansion, break down the symbolism Akutami uses to construct it, and talk about how this process, integration, can be the beginning of living a life that, while not perfect or any easier, it will lead to living a life with far less self-inflicted suffering. With all of that said, are you ready? Let's begin. Starting as always with the foundations. First, since Jujutsu Kaisen is a spiritual successor of Devilman, and Devilman is heavily psychoanalytical, naturally I decided to treat the series the same way. In general, Yuji represents the persona, the I you wish to be, whereas Sukuna embodies the shadow, the I you wish not to be. Between the two is the ego or the I, which is typically a combination of the conscious and unconscious parts of yourself that makes you who you are. Second, something to keep in the back of your mind is that at the start of Chapter 1, before dying, Yuji's grandfather tries to tell him about his parents, but Yuji and, as a matter of fact, Megumi refuse to be told the reason behind the absence, and both characters end up becoming Sukuna's vessel. Coincidence? Jokes aside, this is a great way to establish that the avoidance of looking at the past and understanding why things happened causes issues down the line. And while not being the main subject of the story, it is an important one, especially when it comes to figuring out Yuji's domain expansion. So, what is it? I see it as a depiction of active imagination, a method of consciously engaging with the unconscious mind. You intentionally invite parts of the psyche like the shadow into an inner space and enter into a sort of dialogue with them. Jung called it observing the stream of interior images, a mediation of opposites, which is precisely what happens in the domain, a direct dialogue with his shadow and exploration of subconscious memories. Jung outlined this process in works like The Secret of the Golden Flower. He describes the first step as Wu Wei, the Taoist principle of letting things happen, where the unconscious leads and the conscious ego merely observes and records. The goal is access. In the second stage, consciousness takes the lead. As images and emotions from the unconscious flow in, the ego actively engages. This begins with spontaneous insights, but the real work is evaluation and integration, converting insight into an ethical obligation to live it. While Jung described the process broadly, later thinkers expanded on the process and are listed in the book Jung and Active Imagination, which broke it down into more actionable steps. I will be using Johnson's, but they are more or less the same thing. 1. The invitation. Yuji invites Sukuna into the domain space for dialogue. 2. The dialogue. The entire domain expansion is a conversation between the two. 3. The values. Yuji realizes, I thought life was about understanding your role and fulfilling it, but now I don't think that's right. He reframes life's value not in grand roles, but in small fragments of memories. 4. The rituals. Later on, Yuji tells Sukuna, you are me, offering to live together, accepting that he alone is meant to contain him. Now that we have the framework, let's see how Akutami visually builds this introspective space in the manga. The first hint that this is what Gege was going for is in Yuji's hand sign. This is a recall to my favourite panel where Yuki tells Geto he has two sides, one that hates non-sorcerers and one that rejects that idea. But instead of holding the hands separately, Yuji interlocks them, becoming one, to represent the side of Yuji that has an overwhelming sense of self and complete disregard for others, and the side that rejects that idea being held together in a single space that is his domain expansion. Another reason I see this as an introspective journey is the symbolic landscape established at the beginning of the chapter. As scholar Anne Meredith Price notes in her essay Alienation, Trains and the Journey of Life, where she analyses Japanese literature spanning 50 years, trains often depict a protagonist attempting to resolve an estrangement from self, others or society. The station represents the starting line where characters are about to embark on a grueling journey of self-discovery. Trains and train stations are one of the most common motifs in the series, especially during their openings. The next panel we see is the two of them going down the stairs. Stairs in a descending movement signify a deliberate descent into the subconscious or the unknown. Third tunnels, in general, these are symbols of transition and passage, moving from one stage of life or one state of mind to another. So by using all three, we are told that this would be a rather introspective journey, even before we get to the actual meat and potatoes of it all. There is a bonus round, the fourth one, which is that Yuji Itadori's domain is quite literally a ghost town. According to my mythos, the ghost town is a landscape of the past held in stasis but full of meaning. It symbolises parts of ourselves emptied of use but not erased. As a monument to a story that has ended, so do our childhood memories. I found it interesting that the first thing that Yuji mentions was coming back to this place for the first time in almost 10 years for his grandfather friend's funeral. We are also introduced to the Oni Kenbai statue. Passed down since before the Edo period, this Buddhist ritual uses onomasks, swords and pounding drums to drive out evil spirits and bless the community with peace, harvests and family safety. Keep in mind, these are still meant to be ogres or demons who are using their powers for good. I see this statue in three ways. A monument to Yuji's old goal to destroy Sukuna, a symbol of his new path to be a curse that protects, or a representation of the domain itself as a demon's sword dance, where the self faces its dual nature, the demon that defends and the demon that devours. I haven't seen it used much as a symbol, so it is kind of hard to pinpoint the meaning in such cases. Now we get into the childhood experiences. And the first thing I noticed was how many of those memories were bittersweet. For example, Yuji remembers getting his foot stuck in the box swing, believing he was going to die. He drops slime into the sandbox, tries to wash it clean, and watches it being drained away. He spends all his allowance on ice cream, only to throw it up later. These are ordinary childhood moments that go wrong. Moments where he feels powerless, where attempts to fix things only make them worse, or where simple indulgence backfires. He also remembers loving the feeling of drinking sweet milk tea after shoveling snow, which is work, only for his grandfather to dismiss it as sticky and disgusting while drinking bitter black coffee. A moment where something warm and meaningful to a child is casually devalued by an adult. Yuji remembers believing the jingle sounds were Santa Claus, only to later realise the sound of bells came from snow chains. Taken together, these memories don't point to one defining trauma, but the death of innocence by 1,000 cuts, as Nanami puts it. The accumulation of mundane, everyday despairs is what makes a person an adult. So at the risk of getting too personal, I want you to know that your bad experiences are valid. It doesn't matter if they are small, so small that it is even embarrassing to mention when someone asks you, "What hurts?" They hurt, and that makes them enough to matter and big enough to be named and addressed. Yuji has been a witness to the strongest place in the weak from the very beginning of the story. Remember chapter 1? His teacher tried to use his position in the hierarchy to force Yuji into track and field, and the only reason he was able to do what he wanted was that he was able to win through strength. But this message is also reflected through a couple of panels on his domain expansion. Mostly in the panel where Yuji mentions local shops being replaced by shopping malls. But it was okay, because there was at least a movie theatre. There is also a panel where he mentions how the grasshoppers are gone. In Japan, catching grasshoppers is a childhood rite of passage, a symbol of luck and simple joy. By noting their disappearance, Yuji is noting the death of that naivete. It can either mean his own lack of ability to find joy as easily as he used to, or as in the overall society due to the decision made by those before or above us. The third one that can go either way is the crayfish, because the conflict is also internal. Fun fact, out of the 3 crayfish species found in Japan, 2 of them were introduced from North America between 1926 and 1930. Since then, the invasive species have spread aggressively, displacing the native crayfish through competition for shelter, direct predation, and disease. Again, it could have been the representation of the strong versus the weak, and all of that which was covered in the culling games, among other places. But I also think that it could represent how, if we see the small pond as Yuji's soul, where 2 versions of him coexist. There is the side that wants to adapt to the harsh reality of the world, the side that wants to win, to be the strongest, and the side that genuinely wants to help, the side that holds on to its humanity. Like those invasive crayfish, the might makes right ideology spreads to an unhealthy degree if left unchecked, eventually starving out the parts of you that still know how to love and how to coexist. That said, which side wins isn't always just about willpower and controlling it. There is also an element of luck. It's about your childhood and whether you have a moral anchor to remind you that your humanity is actually worth keeping in a world that rarely rewards that. His grandfather and Todo were for Yuji, Geto was for Gojo, and Yuji was for Megumi. And again, tying it back to the last scene with Yuji and the stalker thief, where he becomes that moral anchor to someone else who can hold both accountability and space for redemption. Now the next stage, the values. When Yuji said to Yuji Kuna, "I thought that life was about understanding your role and fulfilling it, but now I don't think that is right." At this moment, life isn't solely about playing a predetermined role, but about the small, sometimes disconnected fragments that give it depth. And that you as a living human being have value that doesn't depend on your output. That walking your dog, eating and pooping, not connecting with anyone, is okay. What's not okay is when we internalize a standard and project it outward, judging everyone by that impossible measure. It helps no one, neither you who can't sustain it, nor others who can't live up to it. It only spreads suffering in a world that is in no shortage of it. I think it is worth noting that Yuji Kuna, throughout this conversation, continues to say, "I don't care," because he is meant to represent the part of him that doesn't care for such sentimentalities, the part that prioritizes endurance and dominance over emotional growth. And the most important part is that there are some parts of ourselves that are simply not solved with rationalization. Otherwise, our bad sides would be easy to fix. This is why Jujutsu Kaisen is such a good story to me, because it sort of indulges in the incorrect or incomplete ideals and watches it reach its failed conclusion like, yes, you can be the strongest, but you will be lonely. You can keep all the emotions to yourself, but you will rot from the inside out. Because the whole point is not elimination or suppression, but individuation. Individuation is the lifelong process of integrating conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche to become a whole, unique individual. It involves separating from collective societal, parental, or persona-based expectations to discover one's true self, often by integrating the shadow or repressed aspects. As Jung says, the patient found that there is an inborn dynamic process that unites opposite positions within the psyche. It draws polarized energies into a common channel, resulting in a new symbolic position that contains both perspectives. Either all choices become both and, but in a new and unexpected way. So by the end of the series, when Yuji tells Sukuna, "You are me," and says, "Even if no one else will accept you, I'll live with you." To me, this represents a truly healthy form of self-acceptance. It's not about accepting extreme behaviors, but acknowledging that the potential for those extremes exists within you and live with them. Continuously choosing not to be that ever again. But I believe that the first step to even make that change possible is to understand where it comes from. And while it would be nice to have a domain expansion to do this, like we are shown here, I think it is important to talk about ways you can reach this place on your own. Obviously, I am not a therapist. So my first advice is to go to a licensed therapist who will be trained in containment and will help you go where you need to go. This joke from Tomlinson rings true to this day.
People are scared to go to therapy because they think it's someone sitting in a chair going, "You suck." But it's not. It's you in a chair going, "I suck." And then your therapist is like, "That's great. Let's start there." Therapy just helps you get to the bottom of why you're trash, okay? You go into therapy and you're like, "Here's all the stuff that sucks about me." And she goes, "Okay." And she puts it all up on the wall like you're solving a crime together. Fun! And then she gets some of that red string the detectives use at home when they've been thrown off the case for going rogue. And she starts connecting each crappy thing about you to each one of your corresponding childhood traumas. And you're like, "Oh my God, that's why I'm like this." And she's like, "That's why you're like this." And you're like, "Am I fixed now?" And she's like, "God, no."
Also, I don't know if Gege did this on purpose, but I thought this was very fitting of Yuji.
I realized in therapy that because my mom died young, I have this irrational belief that I am also going to die young. So I've been living in a very intense, unhealthy way my entire adult life where I'm like, I can't take a break, I gotta be working all the time, I have to hit these goals and achievements, otherwise I'm nothing.
I think we tend to downplay how much our bad experiences affect our lives. We often don't truly look at where our pain comes from until we've hit rock bottom, and only then do we begin the never-ending work of managing it and eventually accepting it. For me, stories have been a way to access those memories. The original NGE has had the biggest impact on my life. It surfaced childhood memories I'd buried, and I realised they were negatively affecting my relationship with myself and others. Other stories I can think of: A Silent Voice, Mushishi, Arcane, Midnight Gospel, Carol and the End of the World, and of course Jujutsu Kaisen. And I'm sure other stories down the line will unlock other things, but you can achieve this through games, painting, journaling, meditation. A combination of two or more, anything that gets you to a point of self-inspection. The goal is to find a way to allow things to come to the surface, to feel them, and to see them as pieces of the puzzle that makes you who you are. And I must say, it is also not pleasant looking at the moments that marked you. Your failures, low moments where you were alone, wounded and tired, it's never fun. But acknowledging it and working through them is the right path forward, to quote Jung. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The point is to make the unconscious conscious. Otherwise, patterns repeat, and we call it fate. It's the internal work Yuji models. It starts with understanding why you do what you do, why you chase what you chase. After you begin to figure out what's going on inside, what is at the end of the chain of 1,000 miles, you can start the personal journey of defining what living a good life means to you. It comes from doing things that are true to your authentic self.
This is what it sounds like.